On today's Locked On Texan podcast, what are the areas of improvement for Houston that we're all anticipating seeing them getting better at during training camp and getting better on third down while that can take this offense to the next level?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your, who am I, Cody? I'm your Texas football
John
analyst,
Hickman?
Sports Guy Hickman.
That's girl dad
32.
brain.
Girl dad brain, 32 brain, getting up in age. But I'm your Texans football analyst, Johnson Sports Guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, Texas Credential Media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. Thank you to all of our first-time listeners and viewers. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to all of our returning listeners coming back as Cody and I continue to talk Texans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Cody, take it away.
And on today's installment of Locked On Texans, look, ever since the end of the 2023 season, we have talked a lot about the Houston Texans being a championship contender. They actually spent the offseason living up to that expectation, bringing in all-pro caliber talent. And we basically spent the past month, especially with the preview that we got doing OTAs and mandatory minicamp, talking about whether or not this team could be a top 5 offense, top 5 defense, MVP and CJ Stroud and all this other stuff. But we also got to take a step back and look at the reality of the situation and look at what are some of the areas that the Houston Texans need to improve in order for them to live up to those high expectations. And of course, the one thing that's been on John's mind for happy birthday, by the way, my brother. I love you, my guy. But the one thing that's been on John's mind, not just going into the 2024 campaign, but over the last couple of seasons, has been the struggles of the Texans and their third down efficiency. So we're going to look at that. But John, before we get into that, because it's your birthday, I'm going to let you go first, man. What are some of the areas where you would like to see the Houston Texans improve going into the 2024 season?
I mean, they got to run the ball better. They got to be a better running team. And Houston had their moments last year. And again, I think the reluctancy of giving Devin Singletary the nod earlier in the year. If you remember, Devin Singletary ran the ball, I think right around 4 yards per carry. When he became the starter, I think that bumped up to 4.4 yards per carry, somewhere along that ballpark of numbers. He was an effective runner for Houston. He was the most impactful runner for Houston. And again, I say this all the time. I think we look at Devin Singletary and Houston's relationship a little differently if he would have gotten the nod earlier in last season to be the starter.
That's true.
Career year for Devin Singletary, and that's what getting the nod, I think, in week 9. So you look at 9 weeks, and of those first several weeks of the NFL season for Houston, there were moments where Devin Singletary, I would say, was kind of freezed out of the offense in terms of getting an opportunity to run the ball. They were really trying to give Dameon Pierce an opportunity to establish himself. So, again, he could have been a 1,100-yard rusher last year for Houston, on top of his career year. But overall, they got to get better. But it's not just on the running backs. I'm not going to sit back and say, well, listen, it's all on Joe Mixon. It's all on Dameon Pierce. It's for the guys up front too, and not necessarily the guys that's been missing in action, right? It's not just all on Kenyon Green. It's not just all on sophomore Juice Scruggs, and we presume he'll be the starting center. It's on Laremy Tunsil too. It's on Titus Howard too.
That is
Those
true.
guys got to be, much more nastier, I think, and much more dedicated to establishing the run up front. Now, again, I say this all the time. I never want to see a season where Titus Howard, who was paid to be a right tackle, plays at left guard again. Don't want to see that no more. Need to see him back at right tackle. But just those guys up front, I think we'll talk about getting better on third downs, right? But one thing that's going to help this offense out is just this offensive line being much more nastier. And I would describe this O line, while they have one of the better left tackles in the NFL, no doubt about it. Laremy Tunsil is up there. Laremy Tunsil is also a smooth operator. And if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. Like, Laremy doesn't necessarily, it's like he doesn't break a sweat being that good. So I would like to see, this is a call to action. If he sees this, Laremy, if you see this, please don't go off for me because I'm a fan of yours. But I would like to see Laremy be a little bit more nastier. Titus Howard be a little bit more nastier when it comes to establishing the run up front. And then, of course, getting guys back healthy. That's always going to be a major part. And understanding as a running back that you got a gap assignment for a reason. Like, the hole is here for a reason. And again, I'm going to call back to the struggles of Dameon Pierce last year. Fan of Dameon Pierce as a person. Last year as a player, I thought vision-wise, that's where you saw a lot of the decline and downfall of his game going back to his sophomore year. But I look at this offense, I don't want to see CJ have to do it all. Do I think he can? Yes, I do. We've seen him do it. That Tampa Bay Buccaneers game was one of those moments where he had to do it all for the most part at their quarterback position. But I want to see these guys make a collective effort to kind of take some of that pressure off of him. He is still a sophomore going into his sophomore year. Sophomore slumps are real, and you do want to give him an opportunity to be as fresh as possible if we think that it's getting to a conference game a must. So that means a deep run. And a lot of times in the NFL, those deep playoff runs, they start in week 13, week 14. I still think that this division will be competitive. The AFC is going to be competitive. You want them to be a little bit lighter, a little bit more healthier. Don't want a lot of wear and tear on them. And I think when you make a move for Joe Mixon, when you give that confidence to Dameon Pierce, Jawar Jordan, a guy that I don't know if he's going to see a lot of snaps this year, but he's a very good runner. You got to give this offense that element of the run game to get over. We talk about humps a lot on this show. I know I have, getting over the hump. I think CJ is going to be great enough to dominate that hump, but you got to have other guys to pull their weight to get over that hump. They got to run that ball, and it can't be for no 96 yards per game.
Since you took care of the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to switch over and look at the defensive side of the ball, because the one thing that Coach D'Amico Ryans has talked about throughout this whole entire offseason, you guys have heard, is probably my favorite thing that I've said throughout this whole entire offseason, is in order for the Houston Texans to get to where they want to be, they're going to have to beat some of the best quarterbacks that this league has to offer. In order to do that, they know that they got to get after the quarterback. But not only that, John, listeners and viewers, they also got to make sure they improve their passing defense. Last year alone, and we kind of talked about this yesterday a little bit, but last year alone, they finished 22nd in passing defense, giving up an average of 234 yards per game. When you are going up against the likes of Tua, when you're going up against the likes of Patrick Mahomes, when you're going up against the likes of Josh Allen, when you're going up against the likes of Lamar Jackson, the Houston Texans cannot continue to give that many yards up in passing, because once again, if you get those quarterbacks in a rhythm, you're looking at a situation where the Houston Texans could and probably will fall short of their expectations. And John, like I mentioned, we talked about this a little bit on yesterday as well. The number one concern about the Texans giving up that many passing yards last year was due to the fact that majority came due to the deficiencies at your safety unit. Yes, I understand a lot of your safeties had to deal with injuries, i.e. Jimmy Ward. We talked a lot on this show about the struggles that Jalen Pitre had throughout his whole entire sophomore season. But it seems like those two guys are going to come back and start. They need to find a way to get the best out of those two, because when you take a look at your corners, they did their job. Derek Stingley Jr. did his job when he was healthy, but even when he wasn't healthy, you still had the likes of Steven Nelson stepping in. At one time, you had the likes of Shaq Griffin stepping in, and even you had an opportunity to see what you had in a guy like DeAndre Houston Carson, who stepped in and did his job. So the Texans, man, I think that they're definitely going to have an opportunity to have one of the league's best defense, but in order for them to go from one of the best to the league's elite defense, they got to make sure they take care of that passing defense. Another thing that I believe the Houston Texans need to improve, I don't want to say stop being conservative, because we saw what this Houston Texans team can do when you open up the playbook. However, there was moments like the game against the Atlanta Falcons, the game against the Carolina Panthers, the game against the New York Jets, where I felt maybe Bobby Slow was taking it just a little bit too easy on his opponents. I want to see for the whole entire regular season, I want to see Bobby Sloyd not just open up the playbook, keep the playbook open, because you have the weapons. And with those weapons, John, I think the Houston Texans will finally have an opportunity to improve in one area they have been struggling with for over the last 4 to 5 seasons, and that's their deficiencies when it comes to third down. So we're going to talk about that on the other side of the break.
Listen, guys, I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But the reality is, it got to stop sometimes. The playoffs are over with now. We're getting fewer games. Got MLB still rocking and rolling. The WNBA is hot, but no hockey, no NBA. We're still waiting on the NFL season, but we'll get there soon. The sports are not really sporting like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the MLB. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Cody, what can CJ Stroud do to get better in 2024? What can Bobby Sloyd do better? What can this offense do better? This was an offense that was middle of the pack last year, right? Which is a great improvement. They were actually, they were 13th last year out of 32 defensively. I mean, they, major improvements. Only allowed 21 points per game, but on the offensive side of the ball, a little bit over 22 points per game. Major improvement from the years prior, where it was hard for Houston to catch a touchdown. But we always got to look at ways to get better, and I think with CJ, it's been hard to do so, because I think for me, I believe that getting better for him is just replicating moments that he had last year. Tampa, some moments in the Denver game where he struggled a little bit, but was able to get the win at the end, right? But there's one game that I look at that kind of kicked everything off for me last year, and that was the Pittsburgh Steelers game. I think that was his coming out party in a sense. 16 of 30, 306, 2 TDs. Nico Collins, by the way, also had 7 catches for 168 yards. That was a come-out game for him. But when I look at the game, what stood out the most for me was Houston 50% on third downs. And the struggles of Houston last year on third downs, I think, really started to show once we got later in the year for the Houston Texans last year. Just to give you guys some numbers, rushing third down numbers. 3.4 yards per carry. That's the worst for the whole year outside of fourth down. That was negative 1.9. But when you look at the first 3 downs, only 3.4 yards per carry, 1 TD, rushing the ball, only 16 first downs last year. That is the worst on down splits, rushing the ball. When you look at passing, sacked 14 times, tied for the worst. 72 first downs, but a passer rating of 96.1, a completion percentage of 58.2. I'm going to kind of go back to what I just said in the first segment. I think for Houston to be a better offense, to really unlock their offense, they're going to need Joe Mixon and company to be better for Houston running the ball on third downs. They got to convert on third downs. But I also want to take it a step further and say a lot of times when you look at the one-trick pony offense where you got to count on your quarterback to get it done, then I think that impacts how teams may approach you defensively on first and second downs. That's where I think we can see the most from Joe Mixon. He's a much better runner on early downs, and I think they got to get that going early in the games to be able to have easier conversions on third downs. We don't want to see a lot of 3rd and 5s, a lot of 3rd and 6s, right? I look at a 3rd and 6 as a 3rd and long, more manageable. 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, where your playbook isn't limited to, well, we need CJ to go out there and win on this third down conversion. 3rd and 2, we trust Joe Mixon to get it done. And recently, Joe Mixon has not been the best third down runner. However, in a manageable situation, you got Joe Mixon. And honestly, listen, Houston has a lot of confidence in Dameon Pierce this year. That's where we could possibly see the two switch out on a 3rd and short, where you got a tougher running back who can pick up those harder yards. And, of course, for Dameon Pierce, the discipline of hitting your hole when it needs to be hit. But they got to get better on third downs. I think overall last year for Houston, I'm going to look up these numbers really quickly. But I want to say as a team, the Houston Texans set around 35% in terms of completion percentage, conversion percentage on third down, right under 38%. And I think that put them around between 16 to 20. If we're looking at an offense that we believe can be the top 5, small details matter. So bumping up from 16 to 20 to top 10, now you're looking at 22 points per game to potential 25 points per game because you're able to move the chains. And you're not stuck on one side of the field. And you're getting closer to where you may not score 7. You may not get to 7 or 6 before the PAT. But you can get to 3 because you're in a better field goal range, because you're in a better positioning on the field. And that's where I look at Houston getting better offensively. I think third down will be a key for them moving forward. And I can't wait to have an opportunity to ask Bobby Sloak that once training camp starts.
And they definitely have the weapons to do so. And I know that might sound a little bit cliche, but John, since we were talking about the third down, I went back and I took a look at the last time that the Houston Texans were a really good team at converting their third downs. And that took place, ironically, during the 2019 season when you had a really solid run game, when you had Deshaun Watson playing near arguably at his best, when you had the offensive line that was playing near arguably their best, when you had a wide receiving core that feature D-Hop, a healthy Will Fuller, and all the rest of those guys. Like, that was the last time that the Houston Texans were actually a very somewhat of a dangerous team on the offensive side of the ball. And they ended up converting 43% of their third downs during that season, and that placed them 8th in the league. By the way, that is a year that they did make it, of course, to the playoffs and reached the divisional round where they unfortunately fell to the Kansas City Chiefs. But John, I think that this is an opportunity for the Houston Texans, given everything that they have built throughout this whole entire offseason. And this is why you go out and get a Joe Mixon. This is why you go out and get a Stephon Diggs. This is why you come back and you get excited to see Tank Dell looking healthier and looking better. Because the one thing that I like that you said, the Houston Texans, middle of the pack throughout majority of the season, but it was towards the end of the season where that trend of struggling to convert on third down started to repeat itself again. And that's very important because towards the end of the season, that's when we started to notice that a lot of the injuries, even though they did come away victorious in a lot of those clutch games that they needed to get to the playoffs, but towards the end of the season, we started to notice that, hey, they missing Tank Dell in the wide receiver core to give you that additional playmaker. Hey, they are missing somebody on the offensive line to help create that extra gap, and I truly do believe, man, if this team has an opportunity to continue to stay healthy, you already add the weapons and everything, the Houston Texans will definitely improve in their third down deficiency.
I do want to add that for the Houston Texans and Joe Mixon, as I mentioned, that recently. He has not been the best. Last year on third downs, rushing wise, 18 carries, 34 yards, 1.9 yards per carry, along of 2 TDs. But when you look at Joe Mixon in early down situations, first down averages 4.2 yards per carry, second down 4.5 yards per carry. That's what I mean. Like if we go based off of that alone, that's a 3rd and 2 right there.
But how
That's a
much?
third. That's a 3rd and 1 right there for Houston on the offensive side of the ball. So now you're looking at unlocking bootlegs. You got Dalton Schultz, you got Brevin Jordan, you got Cade Stover. You can get fancy with. You got Tank Dell who you can do some creative things with, right? Early downs is what Houston will need success wise to be better on third down. And they had their moments last year. I think again the Pittsburgh Steelers game was the game. If I remember correctly, we came on the show and we said that was the best version of Bobby Sloak we had seen to that point. That was week 3. Now we was going off the first 2 weeks of the year and then preseason, but that was a damn near flawless game, I think, game plan from Bobby Sloak. Everybody was hitting on all cylinders offensively. They're going to need success early on to be able to have those converting on third downs 45% of the time, 55% of the time, 50% of the time. They're going to need to be successful early. They got to punch teams in the mouth offensively. And I think with how this team is put together, health-wise as well, up front, again, they'll be able to do that.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. John, even though we are expecting this team to enter the season with championship aspirations, and I truly do believe that the Texans have a really good chance to represent the AFC in New Orleans, February 2025, I do want to look at how can we judge success for this team as of right now if they don't make it to the Super Bowl, which brings me to this big question. Is getting to the conference championship game a must? And I know a lot of people want to say, well, of course it is. However, I do want to keep in mind that the Texans, yes, you brought in some talented players, all pro caliber players. This is still somewhat of a young team. And you know me, John, I'm big on experience. And I look at it from a standpoint, if the Houston Texans, let's say, lose in the divisional round again next year, would that be classified as a failure? And this is the AFC.
Yeah, I'm looking at the AFC right now. You got Kansas City, of course. You always got to say the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. The AFC North,
jeez.
Baltimore, Cincinnati, if they can stay healthy with Joe Burrow. Regardless of how anybody's feelings are, this was a team that made the playoffs, was a damn good team put together last year.
If he could finally be healthy with a good head on his shoulder.
If he can get back to being where he was before he left Houston. You got the Cleveland Browns. That's a dogfight, right? You got the Buffalo Bills. And then in the AFC South, you got Houston, you got Jacksonville. Conference game, I think, is it's a 50-50 must for me. Because I think it's how they lose will be based on how we determine what was success for them. If that makes sense. Success for Houston next year, of course, I think is just being top 10 across the board. Without a shadow of a doubt, I don't know how they would rank it, but I think they'll be a top 10 special teams unit. I am never going to question that with Frank Ross. But top 10 offensively. And they're knocking at the door on both sides of the ball. Top 15 on both sides of the ball. That's including not having a good run game. That's including not being able to stop the pass. They were special in different areas on both sides of the ball last year, but just being a top 10 unit across the board, getting to the playoffs. And honestly, I think they do got to knock off one of those big dogs. Their playoff win last year was against Joe Flacco, who, no disrespect to Joe Flacco, but he was sitting on his couch a couple of months before that trying to sign up for his AARP discount. So when you look at some of the big dogs in that conference, Baltimore, Lamar Jackson, Cincy, Joe Burrow, poetic justice beating the Cleveland Browns with a Deshaun Watson, I think would be kind of fun. Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen. And again, Mahomes, Kansas City. Success if they don't get to the conference game, but if they knock out a big dog, or if they don't win that conference game and don't get to the Super Bowl, if they knock out a big dog, I think that's a successful season for Houston.
I agree, and that's where I was going. I want to say, get into a conference championship game is a must because I look at it from a standpoint, this version of the Houston Texans, because we never really seen them go have an off season like this where they're taking chances like this and bringing in Pro Bowl and all pro caliber players. I want to say get into the conference championship game is a must for this organization. However, even though you still got the top dog in Kansas City, you still got another team that, at some point they gotta break through the struggles they've been dealing with over the last couple of seasons. And I'm talking about the Baltimore Ravens, and they still a top team in this conference.
And they got the big dog. They got the MVP, two-time MVP.
The MVP. And they got somebody that you have struggled with in let's say 6 out of the last 7 seasons and Derrick Henry. But and those are just the 2 best teams in the conference right now. You still got Miami, who is scratching the surface of being a big dog in this conference. And even in your own divisions, look, say what you want about Trevor Lawrence. I saw a lot of people making fun of the extension that he got, but Trevor Lawrence is a top 10 quarterback in this league.
I tell you what, with Trevor Lawrence, and I've been saying a lot of that as well, not have Trevor Lawrence on your team and see would it not be able to replace him with either a caliber of himself or higher, and see how bad your team's gonna look.
And when I say top 10 quarterback in the league, I'm talking about number 10 or number 9, but anywhere it goes, Trevor Lawrence is a damn good quarterback. I don't know what everybody else been watching. So there's a lot of competition. And look, get into the AFC Championship game is going to be a fight. It's going to be a gauntlet. But John, I agree with you. Being top 10, top 5 in a lot of statistical categories, my biggest way of judging success for the Texans, look, I love the addition of Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon, but I still want to see growth out of the young guys. I still want to see growth out of CJ, which, I mean, at this point, I got to scratch my head and really nitpick what I want to see grow from him with. Same thing with Will Anderson Jr. And that's a good thing, but I want to continue to see consistent growth with all of the young guys in this organization, because the consistency in their growth, getting that experience is going to be part of the reason why we look back 10 years from now and be like, dang, Texans still got their Super Bowl window open.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a fact. And I just want to see him knock one of those big dogs out. When you look at Houston's wins was scheduled last year, and I just want to briefly mention this before we close out today's show. They first game of the year they lost to Lamar Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Beat a top 10 quarterback, as Cody says, and that Pittsburgh game was week 4. Beat a top 10 quarterback, as Cody puts it, in Trevor Lawrence in week 3, right? But beat Joe Burrow and Cincy.
Mm-hmm.
Beat a big dog. Got to the Super Bowl. And lost to Lamar Jackson again in the playoffs. So it's not like they can't do it. And I think for Houston, and they play Baltimore again, that's a game that got to be circled. They gotta replace a big dog team next year. At the end of next year, you got to look at this Houston team, if they don't get to the conference game, as the NFL looked at Buffalo. Ironically, Stephon Diggs helped that. They're coming, and this eventually they're going to get over the hump. Now, Buffalo didn't do it. Hopefully, Houston can get over that hump and get to a conference game of Super Bowl. But the chatter has to be validated. The MVP talks, the top 10, top 5 offensive conversation, that has to be validated. And I think to do so, knocking one of those big dogs out is the best way to go about it. Thank you guys for watching and listening to today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody CLTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, happy birthday to John. I will call him old, but in less than 14 days, I'll be the same age as him.
You're right there.
Peace.
Peace. Cash at me.